could I invite Paula Smith, Chair for Banks Peninsula Water Management Committee, to come forward.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
There should be quite a few staff, and I know Pam was quite keen to come, but I can do the Banks Peninsula. So you will see on page 293 of the agenda that in the last 2 months we have done those things. I can't remember whether I reported last time on the report that's been put together of all the immediate steps funding projects on Banks Peninsula. Did I talk to that last time? You might not remember, no. But
well, happily remind us.
Yes, well, I have a copy here. I'll show you. But anyway, it's about all the immediate steps money that has been spent, and it's from the landowners' own voices. And when you read it all together, you start to build up a big picture about some progress being made on riparian planting that we assume is going to improve water quality on Banks Peninsula. Hi, Leslie. And the other 3-4 things, I might just take questions on those if you like. In general, the last 2 months we've got a new facilitator for Banks Peninsula. Some of our energy has been channeled into resolving some process and relationship matters that arose, and the focus going forward is going to be on the review of our zone implementation plan, which you will all know is called the ZIP, and to make it a bit more useful to agencies like you, and to channel funding so that more gets achieved from it. So that's going to be the focus going forward.
Good. We've had a discussion, or I have had a discussion with staff around the timing of these presentations, and we're going to try and link them in with the community week. So when the community boards come and present, then we'll get you guys to come and present on that week, because again it will just take us back into the community focus, which is very much what the zone committees are doing.
That seems sensible to me, but I will go back to the committee and talk to them about that and make sure they're cool with it.
It just means that it's the second week of the month as opposed to the first.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So questions for Paula? Yanni.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I'm probably on the Christchurch West Melton one, so that's not.
That often happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a similar question to both, which is just around the impact of the Port Hills fires and the sediment runoff, and it probably affects both sides of the two zones.
Yes. So on you'll all realise that of course that the zone boundary is at the top of the Port Hills. So in the Banks Peninsula zone, the fire major effects were in the Ohinatahi Reserve and some neighbouring farms, and we've not had any updates about impact on water quality on those downstream areas. But I mean, what we can see is that there's already quite good plant cover re-establishing, just coming away, and there's been a massive planting effort and will be going forward in Ohinatahi. But it's a good question, and I will try and get some more information about whether anybody is looking at the effects on water quality on our side.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or
do either of you want to talk about the zone, the Banks Peninsula side?
Not Banks Peninsula.
No, right, we've finished Banks Peninsula.
So thank you once again for providing this opportunity to speak to you. I'm Leslie Woodberg, the facilitator for Christchurch West Melton. I'd like to first of all apologise for the Selwyn Waihora zone team. In your agenda, you'll note that they're currently doing a series of seminars on the issues that have been facing the Selwyn district, and so that is what they're currently doing today. So there's 7 seminars, one at lunchtime, which is now, and one in the evening. So today's the one on the lake and the next one will be on the Central Plains water. So I do have some little booklets that go along with that seminar series that councillors are more than welcome to have. I'm happy to field any questions, but I'm probably not the best person to speak to that, and I suggest that we'd probably be more productive to move straight on to Christchurch West Melton.
Okay. Well, I'll let questions flow, but if there is an issue, then don't worry about it. We can get the answers subsequently. Vicky.
Just in relation to the Selwyn one, and it may not be appropriate to ask you, some of the drinking water and the quality of that, is that being dealt with by this committee, or is it just ECAN?
Certainly the drinking water is an issue. It's one of the targets in the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. But in terms of drinking water, as you're probably aware, that Environment Canterbury is responsible for the groundwater aquifers, where most of the drinking water comes from, and the TAs are responsible for the reticulation and their own bores. So if you have an individual bore, and you're taking it for your household supplies, that is your responsibility. So it's a combination of regional council, TAs and individuals.
My concern is with the non-compliance of some of the drinking water bores in the outlying areas, not in the city, and just what's happening about those. And is it something, I mean, it's very difficult for us to question the Selwyn District Council.
So the other main organisation involved is the Canterbury District Health Board. So they will be monitoring the compliance of all those bores. They are keen to be advocating to ensure that the drinking water is at a potable level for everyone, but they have no legislative responsibility for it.
Yep. All right, so if we can move on to Christchurch West Melton. So
Christchurch West Melton Zone Committee, I have on my right Suzanne Verkerk, who's the Vice Chair of the Christchurch West Melton Zone Committee, so she'll provide the report.
Okay, one of the things we've done in the last month was a technical workshop on copper and zinc contamination in urban streams. Of the four main pollutants in urban streams, you've got E. coli, heavy metals, sediment and nitrates, and so we were focusing this month and looking at the heavy metals, which are predominantly your zinc and copper contaminants, and they're highly ecotoxic, which so basically they're eliminating a lot of the small animals, insects and fishes in the rivers because the concentration levels are just simply too high for them to either live or reproduce. So we were looking, past research has indicated that these are addressable problems. There are solutions out there, so this was a workshop looking at what the status quo is and how can we get that to where it needs to be. It was well attended by members from Zone Committee, Christchurch City Council, ECAN, as well as MFE, MBIE and University of Canterbury experts in the field. So we had a really good range of participants. The main findings, there's been a very good study done called the Medusa study by Canterbury University, and the main findings that your hotspots for the zinc is your galvanised roofs. So zinc is predominantly from roofing materials. It comes from the galvanised steel and other materials as well, but your hotspots by an extremely long way are your unpainted galvanised roofs. Painted galvanised roofs are better, but by no means as good as many other alternatives. And copper hotspots. Copper basically comes from brake pads. There is copper from roofing materials as well, but the vast majority of the copper in our waterways is coming from brake pads. And so your hotspots for pollution from that are highly trafficked roads and large car parks with heavy vehicle manoeuvring. The Medusa model is quite good. Basically it shows where all your different sources of pollution come from, and it also enables us to look at scenarios as if we change one of those factors, how that affects the end result. And the various scenarios for copper are relatively simple. The only thing which will get the streams and rivers down to acceptable level is to replace copper brake pads with copper-free brake pads. And the story for zinc isn't as simple. Zinc comes from car tyres as well as roofing materials, and there are many things we can do to reduce the amount of zinc, but there is no one straight answer, so it's going to be a combination effect. The other thing to note is that removing these heavy metals once they're in the system is very difficult. So if you treat your water, you might remove 60% of your pollutants. It's not cheap, it's not easy, it's much better to get rid of them if possible at source. So the rest of the workshop was discussing methods that we could implement these changes. So I'll just run through a couple of the highlights of those. We've got a pretty comprehensive list, which I'm sure you can get from Leslie. But basically one of the main themes which we're lacking is education. This isn't a well-known problem to the public. A lot of people don't realise that they've got copper brake pads on their cars, let alone that copper's killing the life in our streams. So education at all levels, from schools right up to national government, is a really important factor. And if we're going to get change, there needs to be education to allow for that. Legislation is also an important tool, we believe. Bylaws dictating discharges from sites, including concentration limits, would be a very useful tool. Rather than saying don't use copper roofing, for example, you could have a bylaw which stated the total amount of heavy metals are allowed to come off in stormwater, and if people want to have copper, for example, they could coat it or they could treat the water themselves. So having maximum levels dischargeable to stormwater systems for emitters was one of the tools we were considering. Considering putting stormwater to sewage for particularly high catchment areas such as car parks or main arterial routes, possibly just for first flush. Again, that would be, you have to look at the limitations of your stormwater system. But first flush, which is your initial 10 minutes, half hour after rainfall, is where your majority of pollutants come off the road. So it's quite a short period to catch a majority. But basically, encouraging different uses of roofing materials is a big one for zinc pollution. Is pretty much basically how it's got to go. There's no other solution which will achieve the necessary results. Various other regional things could be encouraging less use of cars by new builds having to have bike parks instead of car parks was, you know, one of the myriad of small suggestions, which basically it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. And transport planning, but one of the main things was phasing out copper materials and brake pads. There are other brake pads out there. A major problem to using those ones is there's no labelling. You cannot go and look at a brake pad and instantly know if it's good, and the same thing with roofing materials. So one of the main suggestions was having something along the lines of a 5-star, 5 green stars for materials, for roofing and for brake pads, to enable people to see what they're putting on. A lot of people have got no idea if they're polluting or not, and a lot of architects don't realise what the products do. If you've got a 5-star rating, people understand what that means and they'll instantly realise whether they're polluting or not. There's lots more points we have, which I could go into, but I think I'd like to allow time for questions. So, yeah.
Questions, Dion, Aaron?
Just on the brake pad thing, it's something that's interested me on car parts, and I know the state of California and another state in the United States have banned copper brake pads.
Yep.
Do you think it's a possibility, not just for Christchurch, but for the whole of New Zealand to actually adopt something along those lines?
Definitely. There are multiple the manufacturers are very well aware of this problem.
Yeah.
The end users aren't, end users being the mechanics who are putting them on, and the suppliers to Repco and your mechanics aren't aware of the problem, but your manufacturers are very aware of the problem. And there are currently brake pads available for pretty much every make and model of car.
Yeah, no, they're definitely out
trucks, which are available, and the price difference is not significant. You're talking about $10 to $20 for a set of brake pads, and the quality and longevity is just as good.
I mean, there's an idea I have here, through Madam Chair, is maybe it's something LGNZ could pick up.
I know, we missed the remit this year.
Yeah, no, but we could get it next year through LGNZ, copper brake pad free New Zealand or something along those lines.
We've discovered that actually we can get a bunch of councils on board
Yeah,
on such a proposal.
It would be quite good.
Much quicker and much faster than waiting for an annual conference.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's just a process to go through, but
I'm really happy for that to happen.
Yeah, no, I'd like to do something along that lines.
Was it Yanni? No, Vicky. Oh no, it was Aaron. Sorry, it was Aaron, and then Pauline, and then Vicky. I know.
We do today. So just a couple of quick questions. And I totally agree with Dion's point that just if once you know something's really bad for your environment, then you should just move forward and eliminate it and move on to whatever's next, our next problem. But the trying to mitigate via swales and things, are there any plants that will clean the zinc or the copper?
Short answer, I don't know. That it's not easy to pull out. General plantings don't do it to a significant level.
Right. And
there may be specific plants. I know that some CSROs have done research on specific plants to do that, but your general swale plantings don't pull out a significant amount.
Right.
They do pull out some.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, because I'd hope someone is doing some work around that and what cleans the. Because I have another issue, not so much, it's not rural, but in the city, is the cigarette butts and waterways, because just purely the amount that go into gutters and city intersections. Has anyone done any work around that?
Again, I don't know. Cigarette butts are a problem, but it's mainly a central city problem. And the difference between cigarette butt pollution and copper pollution is copper and zinc. Once they're soluble, it's very hard to get them to particulate out, where I think a lot of your cigarette butt pollutions will settle out.
Yeah, I love smoked fish, but I prefer the traditional method. And finally, do bicycle brakes have copper?
A lot of them do, yes, but you're talking about volumes.
Right.
The volume that will come off a bicycle brake is insignificant. You know, you have a bus brake once, and that's probably all you bicycle braking in Christchurch. You know, it's tackling your big problems first. I think you could worry about bike brakes, but I think the kilograms of copper they're contributing to our streams is insignificant.
It was a loaded question because I thought they didn't. So I just shot myself in the bike seat. Right.
You have a range.
Just make sure that yours don't break off.
Mine was just a follow-up because I think, Leslie, was it over a year ago? The Zone Committee requested Council to write to the Government Department requesting that they look at banning the use of or the sales of copper brake pads, and I'm wondering if we ever actioned that and if we could look into that, because we did agree to do it around the table.
Sorry?
We've already requested Council, the Zone Committee has requested Council to write to the appropriate Government Department and request that they investigate banning the import of copper brake pads. So that may have been, I'm just wondering where that's at, has it been actioned?
Was that a resolution of council?
It was a wee while ago. Do you have any idea?
Could somebody follow up on that?
Yeah, it came through the ITI committee. Yeah.
That's right, did too, yeah. So if we follow that up, it would be quite good.
No, well, I can't put hand on heart and say that I've done that because I simply don't recall signing it. So.
No, but if we just look into it, because it was already resolved.
If it's already resolved, then I'll certainly undertake to do that. But I might take a resolution on the gaining support of the other councils in the country to really sort of.
I think that was part of it as well. Come to think of it,
well,
I think we did broaden it out to that too, to gaining support for the other territorial authorities. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mea culpa. Vicky.
If you don't want to be killing wildlife, that you actually don't know when you're buying brake pads what you're doing. That seems. Does it seem odd to you, or is it just me being weird?
I agree. I think something like having a 5-star, environment health is copper free. There are plenty of symbols already out there. We're thinking of a 5-star one is probably more applicable for your roofing materials type things, where you've got a range where obviously concrete's perfect, solar panels are perfect, colour steel's okay, galvanised terrible. Copper free brake pads, yes, it should be simple. But in order to have copper free meaning much to the average public, you also need to combine it with an education, because I think a lot of the public doesn't know copper kills fish or aquatic life.
Right, Yanni?
Yeah, I was just interested, two questions, just one on the zinc and one on the question before. Have we done an audit? Has anyone done any work around public facilities in terms of roofing materials and looked at whether we could need to change and look at doing that?
There's been localised studies done. There's been a very intensive study done in Addington Brook, but there hasn't been one specifically looking only at council buildings, but there are a lot of council buildings that have highly polluting roofs, yes.
Right. So would that be something you saw that we could pass a resolution to get staff to do some work on?
I think that would be excellent, getting the council to sort out their own roofs and to sort out the brake pads on their own fleet of vehicles would be an excellent start, and it'd be a great way to show that you're leading the community and doing the right thing.
So I'll move an amendment. And then the second one was just to follow up on that question before around the Port Hills fires. I mean, visibly the Heathcote looks really, really full of all sorts of staff. Are you doing any monitoring of that? Have you got any programs underway to try and minimise that or address it?
I'm actually going to pass that one on to Leslie.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, there is monitoring. Some of you will be aware that Cashmere Stream Care Group has done a number of years of clarity monitoring. There's also monitoring being coordinated with Environment Canterbury and the Waterways Centre, Jenny Webster Brown at Canterbury University. But yes, the Heathcote has been looking in a very sorry state, and no doubt, as I understand it, the fires will have contributed to that. I think some of the major solutions is actually coming from the Christchurch City Council in terms of sediment retention basins. There's also the Stone Committee has prioritised the areas affected by the fire in terms of their immediate steps funding. So that's 100,000 of trying to plant out riparian areas and areas that are prone to slips. And I understand there's also some funding there that the City Council put in the annual plan for similar activities.
I'd just like to add to that as well, the sediment, existing sediment is also a problem for the heavy metal pollutants, because the existing sediment is polluted, so that does need to be addressed as well for the heavy metal side of it. But until we stop coming in, that's sort of secondary in our focus.
look, I've asked for a change to that, but it's request the committee to investigate the status of copper usage in our facilities and fleet and report back to the council. The reason I'm doing that is that I know, for example, that our heritage building, the Christchurch Town Hall, has a copper roof. It is being protected so that it does not leach into the stormwater system. So there are mechanisms for ensuring that that doesn't happen. And what I don't want is to have a resolution on the books that says that we're going to reduce and remove copper when there are mechanisms that anyone can take to ensure that the stormwater is protected from the leaching from copper roofs. Dion.
I mean, just on that, I personally would like to see us actually, because I mean the brake pads have been identified as a problem, and there are suitable solutions out there which I've just sort of looked at, and I'd actually like us to take a bit more of a stronger stand specifically on our fleet of cars in the resolution.
There are some changes occurring with our fleet of cars, which people
yes,
are aware of.
Yes, I know, but the ones that we own, we could...
Yes, I know, but we're changing our fleet of cars. I'd like to leave it as asking the committee to investigate the status of copper usage in our facilities and fleet. If changes that we're promoting in the fleet area actually result in a new fleet being introduced, then I don't want us to waste time getting rid of something that's getting rid of. So let the committee do the investigation and come back to council with recommendations. Is there any other questions? Yep.
I mean, actually, the council actually runs at least 2 education programs with children on fresh water and, you know, understanding the biodiversity. So hopefully they will be, you know, teaching about these issues at that level. So it would be probably quite good to just follow up on that and see if that's in fact is the case. So.
That would be worth following up on, yes. And I just a comment to as well with you looking at the status of copper roofs. I think it's important to point out you want to remove copper pollution rather than removing copper. If I greatly commend council on having pollution their copper roofs coated and removing the pollutants before they get into stormwater. That's setting an excellent example. And the more that could be advertised that is a viable option, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that it's probably more on the removal before it goes into the stormwater, isn't it, Dave? Dave, do you want to just quickly comment on the town hall?
They're putting in a trap system there. We do have to replace the material in it as it does as we monitor and do it. But my understanding is that they've got around about a 10-year life, and then they can be just renewed and replaced, and that captures all the copper that runs off those systems. Now it is a retrofit because it wasn't in there previously, and we have to obviously do all the stormwater drains that come off the roof. So yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
And 4, investigate the status of copper pollution from usage might be better. Because when as Suzanne said, it's not the copper, it's the pollution from it.
It's the pollution, yeah.
From usage, yeah.
Well, I want them to investigate the status and report back to council with recommendations if required to reduce the impact of pollution. Yeah. All right, so do I have a mover and a seconder? Pauline, Dion seconded. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried.